The Chicago Bears started the season off with a positive 4-2 record, and everything was looking really good for this young team. However, unfortunately, since the bye week, they have lost 5 straight games and currently sit with a record of 4-7. So in today's video, I want to talk about what is wrong with the Chicago Bears and how can this team fix their issues. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure you guys hit the like and subscribe button. But let's hop into it. And we are going to begin the video off by talking about what are the actual issues with the Chicago Bears, because it hasn't been pretty as of late. Now, I do want to say this. I feel like the Bears are a much better team than what that 4-7 record actually speaks. Because if you actually look at their losses within this 5-game losing streak, they had a 1-point loss to the Green Bay Packers, a game in which they had an opportunity to actually win the game, but missed the field goal. They also had a Washington game that came down to a Hail Mary, and had that Hail Mary not converted, you would have beaten a good Commanders team. They also went into overtime with the Minnesota Vikings, and had they been able to put together a drive, they would have won that game. So hypothetically speaking, if they were to have won those 3 games, this team would currently be sitting here with like a 7-4 record as of today. But unfortunately, they don't have a 7-4 record. They actually have the opposite. They're 4-7. Let's go ahead and look at the statistics, because I feel like it does kind of tell you a little bit of the tale of this Bears team. Statistically speaking, on the offensive end, they rank 22nd in points per game, 26th in yards per game, and 18th in touchdowns per game. And on the defensive side of things, they rank 8th in opponents' points per game, 17th in opponents' yards per game, and 5th in opponents' touchdowns per game. I feel like that kind of tells you the dichotomy of this team. The offense isn't great, but the defense is good. Starting off with the offense, what is actually wrong with the offense? Well, I think number one, the offensive line and the play calling is just very bad. Play calling wise, they do have a new offensive coordinator currently calling plays, but I just feel like the play calling hasn't been very good. It gets a little bit too conservative at times. It doesn't rely on the ground as much. They kind of put Caleb Williams in some bad situations, but I don't love the idea of putting all of the blame on the play calling, because it's not always up to them, and sometimes they can't control the execution. The offensive line, on the other hand, has been pretty bad this year. They're one of the top teams in quarterback pressure rate, one of the top teams in quarterback sack percentage, and yeah, they're just not a very good offensive line. Now, I think some of the individuals on the offensive line aren't terrible. Like, I think Tevin Jenkins is a pretty good player. I think Darnell Wright actually still has a pretty bright future. It's just not a very good unit as a whole. I think when we get to the portion of the video where we talk about, what changes need to be made and how we can fix these issues, I think the offensive line is going to be one of the biggest positions that we're going to be trying to upgrade. I think because the offensive line hasn't been good and some of the inconsistent play of Caleb Williams, it has kind of also affected the running game for this team as well. DeAndre Swift has been fine throughout the season, but not great. He's kind of a boom or bust player. He's just one of those guys who's going to make some big rushing plays, but could also have some days that he just doesn't have those big rushing plays and averages like 2 yards a carry. Unfortunately, this team just doesn't have a 1-2 combination like the team like the Steelers have, the Falcons have, or obviously the Detroit Lions have. They can't really rely on Roschon Johnson because he's just not a great running back. He's more of a goal line type of guy, a 3rd and 1, a 4th and inches type of guy. You're not going to see him get too much of the workload. I do think that is something that I would like to change about this team. Find a running back too alongside DeAndre Swift to sort of create a hypothetical Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery type of combination for this Bears team. Defensively speaking, I think the unit is, for the most part, pretty solid. I would think that the defensive line could be better. Ideally, you'd like to have an edge rusher who's going to average like 10 sacks a season. Maybe Montez Sweat could become that. He only has, I think, like 4.5 sacks on the year. Not great, but also not bad. Ideally, as well, you'd like to add into the interior of the defensive line, because the rushing defense hasn't been great this year. So those are all like the general issues of this team. I think there's a lot more that we could go into. I guess we can kind of focus in on Caleb Williams a tad bit. On the year, Caleb Williams has 2,356 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, but I kind of feel like that doesn't give you the full picture of Caleb Williams. The full picture about Caleb Williams is that he's been good this year, just very, very inconsistent. And I feel like that's kind of to be expected. Obviously, the start of the season was really bad for him. He had multiple interception games. He had just had some bad performances, but as of late, it has been better. He's actually coming off one of his more impressive weeks against the Minnesota Vikings. I think Caleb has shown the flashes of what this team expected from him. He's shown good moments, has some really awesome plays, but he's also had some bad moments, which is kind of to be expected from a guy like Caleb Williams, who's coming from a USC offense to obviously playing in an NFL system. I think it's pretty unfair of us to try to compare him to like a Patrick Mahomes, which many of us were doing, not necessarily myself, but many other media members were comparing him to Mahomes and expecting him to play like Mahomes as a rookie, which is just, in my opinion, incredibly insane to even imagine. I kind of expected this type of season from Caleb Williams, a bit of an inconsistent year where he shows a ton of really good flashes, but really needs an offensive mind to run this team. Which kind of leads me to maybe my first point about how to fix this franchise. I feel like you have to get a new coach. I'll be quick. I know you guys want to watch the video, but I'll get right back to it. I just want to let you guys know that I made a brand new YouTube channel called MetroStories. It is a YouTube channel that is simply focused on telling stories of NFL players and NFL teams. So if that does interest you, go ahead and check the description below, as well as the pinned comment where you'll find a link for that channel. But let's get back into the video. I personally like Matt Eberflus as a person, but as a head coach, especially for this Bears team, I just don't think he's a great fit. And the reason why I think that is, I feel like he's more set as like a defensive coordinator. I feel like for this team with a new quarterback, with a bunch of new pieces, I think they would be better off and better served to have an offensive-minded guy for Caleb Williams and the future of his career. Sometimes I kind of imagine how good would Mahomes be if he didn't have an Andy Reid next to him. I kind of wonder the same thing about, Lamar Jackson and many other great quarterbacks. Hell, I think Justin Herbert's having arguably his best year of his career with a new offensive-minded head coach. I kind of feel like those same sort of things could also be done with Matt Eberflus. If you get rid of Matt Eberflus, you're bringing in a new offensive-minded head coach who could stick around with Caleb Williams for hopefully the entire of his career. It could really make a lot of magical moments. In terms of who I would actually hire, I don't really know if I have a set name. Obviously, Ben Johnson would be like the home run hit, but every single team is going to be going after him, so I don't know how realistic it is for him to go to Detroit, all of a sudden to now going against their rival into the Chicago Bears. I just don't think he would do that. There are some other names I also like out there. Liam Cohen from the Buccaneers, I think, is also a good potential piece to pick up. I also think Brian Daboll, if he were to leave the New York Giants, I think he's a good offensive mind. I don't know if he would become a head coach again, but if you want to bring him in as an offensive coordinator, I think it'd be nice. Those are kind of the only names I can think of. If there's any other names out there that you guys can think of, you can obviously put them in the comments. Again, I kind of feel like this team needs an offensive-minded head coach, because if they were going to go for the defensive-minded head coach, they might as well just keep Matt Eberflus. In terms of their assets moving forward, this team has a good number of assets. They have $82 million in 2025 with not a bunch of free agents that I think are worth retaining. The big name free agents that they do have are guys like Keenan Allen, Darrell Taylor, Coleman Shelton, and Tevin Jenkins. They obviously have a bunch of other guys, but nobody who I think is going to take up massive chunks of what they have in terms of salary cap. Me personally, I would not re-sign Keenan Allen. I know he's played better as of late, and I know he's a good quality veteran type player, but my issue with him is that I don't feel like you really need to invest that much more money into a wide receiver 3. Rather, I'd prefer them to put more money into DJ Moore and Rome Odunze. Let those guys flourish as a wide receiver 1 and 2 combination moving forward. Sometimes losing a guy like a Keenan Allen and prioritizing who you already have might be a little bit better for this team. I do think Darrell Taylor, Coleman Shelton, and Tevin Jenkins should get contract extensions. Those guys won't require massive contracts, but if they were to ask for massive contracts, I probably wouldn't re-sign them. But if they were asking for relatively cheap, short or even long-term deals, I would not mind it. Again, this team does have $82 million of cap space. They could potentially open up a tad bit more money by, throwing out some extensions, restructuring some deals, but I'm not going to prioritize that much. In terms of free agency moves, though, I think this team could really look to upgrade several key positions. For me, there's 5 position groups that I would like to see this team address through free agency and the draft. Number 1, the offensive line. It has got to be addressed, whether it's guard or tackle. I think both could be serious issues they need to look to address. I also think adding a second running back alongside DeAndre Swift could also be in the works. Now, whether you want to invest in free agency or maybe spend a 3rd or 4th round pick, it's totally up to what the Bears want to do. But I do think adding a second running back next to DeAndre Swift would be a nice addition for the offense. Because Keenan Allen is likely going to another team, I think you need to bring in a new wide receiver 3. We'll talk about some candidates I have for that. And on the defensive side of things, I feel like the secondary is already pretty set. If you bring back Sanborn on your defense, I don't really think you need to worry about linebacker. But adding some depth to your edge rooms and adding a run-stuffing interior defensive lineman could also be a good move for this team. So some targets for the offensive line in terms of free agency, I have guys like Trey Smith from Kansas City who would be a home run hit. I feel like there's going to be a lot of teams going after him, but if you can open up your pockets and, give him a crap ton of money, he might join you. Some other names are guys like Kevin Zeitler, Garrett Bowles, and James Daniels. Those would all be, in my opinion, home run hits to add to this offense. Kevin Zeitler would probably be like a 1-year rental, but a lot of these names could be given, good-sized contracts for 3 to 4 years and become a staple of your offensive line for Caleb Williams' young career. In terms of some running back targets, I really prioritized a different style of running back from DeAndre Swift. Again, DeAndre Swift is going to be more of your big chunk play type of guy. He's your Jahmyr Gibbs. Now you're looking for your David Montgomery type of guys. So I looked at guys like James Conner, Najee Harris. If you want to go a little bit cheaper, AJ Dillon or even Nick Chubb. I will also say this draft class is filled with a bunch of really good running backs. So if this team wants to go that route, I think you could easily get one in the 3rd or 4th round. I kind of have a similar mindset with the wide receiver 3 position. If you want to look to get one in the draft, you could do so, but I think there's actually a couple really good names that I think this Bears team could target. Guys like Darius Slayton, I think would be a nice piece to add alongside a Rome Odunze. He's kind of similar, but he's also very different. KJ Osborne is a little bit of a smaller receiver who can play a little bit on the inside and on the outside. And then lastly, Matt Collins, he's kind of a do-it-all guy who's just a really good culture fit. And then on the edge room, again, I didn't want to go out there and get some big name guys. You know, I'm not looking to trade for Nick Bosa or nobody. I just want somebody who can play alongside what you already have in Montez Sweat. So I was looking at guys like Dante Fowler, Charles Omenihu, and Josh Sweat. Again, Josh Sweat might be a little bit more expensive than what you'd like to pay, but if you want to increase the production in terms of sacks on the defensive line and generating pressure, I think these are some good names. And then on the interior of the defensive line, there's not a bunch of really good names in the free agency market, but there are a couple. BJ Hill from Cincinnati, Jonathan Hankins from Seattle, and DJ Jones. Those are all good names, good run stoppers. I wouldn't necessarily prioritize that in free agency. I might go ahead and just draft one in round 1 or round 2 of the NFL draft, depending on how things go. In terms of some draft targets for the 1st round, I like guys like Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, Joshua Simmons. I also do like Mason Graham from Michigan. I don't think you need to target any sort of skill positions. I think this has to be an either offensive lineman or defensive lineman pick, ideally offensive lineman. Of the names I did mention, I would really like Kelvin Banks for this offense. He can play on the inside or on the outside. Ideally, I'd keep him at left tackle. I think he is the most pro-ready prospect in the offensive line room, so I like Kelvin Banks for this team a lot. Then in the 2nd round, they actually have 2 picks, one from Carolina, which is a very early 2nd round pick, and of course, a couple picks later, they have their own. Some potential names that could be there could be guys like Kenneth Grant. I don't think he'll be there, but if he were to fall, he'd be a good pickup. Tyleik Williams from Ohio State is a good player. Gray Zabel from North Dakota State could be an offensive lineman if you just want to double down on offensive line. You could also go with a running back like a Dylan Sampson, a Marion Hampton, Ollie Gordon, so on and so forth. And if you want to go with an edge, I think JT Tuimoloau could also be there. He'd be a good fit as well. Again, you have 2 2nd round picks, so you can really just go for whoever you want. And in the 3rd round, there's a couple names that I do like. Again, I don't know if there's any home run hits, but there's a couple good players. Guys like Alfred Collins from Texas. Again, really any running back you want. If you could get a Trevion Henderson, an Ollie Gordon, so on and so forth. If you didn't get one in the 2nd round, you might want to go ahead and look in the 3rd round. Tyler Booker from Alabama and Jared Ivey from Ole Miss. Those are all some really good names. Jared Ivey, obviously more of an edge rusher, and Tyler Booker more of a guard. But those are just a couple names to keep an eye on. I think a lot of those pieces could really help out this team. Again, the big issue for this Bears team is coaching and just a couple, major issues on the both sides of the offensive and defensive line. Other than that, I feel like this team is kind of set for the future. Just kind of fix some things around the edges, tweak a couple things here and there, bring in a good head coach. And I think next year, if Caleb does take that big step forward with a new offensive-minded coach, could really be a good team next year. So that's what makes this team very interesting. And obviously, in the offseason, we'll do a bit more of like a legitimate actual rebuild where I pick out genuine players to add to a team and actually give them deals. This is just more of a video to kind of just give you guys some different ideas as to who they could get. But if you guys did enjoy, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.